before you got in to your series of lectures that became the legendary Khan Academy and what you're doing. Just explain it.
As you mentioned, starting in middle school, elementary school, or high school, the computer we had was a TI-85, but you can program it. And so I figured out, you can make games and things. And then when I went to college, I don't know why everyone's kind of... maybe they expect a lesson of some kind. But when I got to college, I stuck with that, and my first career was in tech and in software. And in during the first .com bubble, I was right in there. I was the first employee at this tech startup that had gone to 40 employees and then had gone back down to like me. And I was just like, I can't handle this. I mean, not only the financial roller coaster, the emotional roller coaster, it got political. And I said, I'm going to go to business school, figure out what I want to do with my life. And I went to business school, and after that, I found out that I really liked finance and the whole world of investing. And so I found myself working at a small hedge fund in Boston in 2003, and in 2004, just got married, had family up visiting me from New Orleans, and one of my cousins needed help with math. And so I started tutoring her remotely. She actually got caught up with her class, and at that point I became what I call a tiger cousin. And I called up her school. I said, I think Nadia Rahman should retake that placement exam. They said, who are you? I said, I'm her cousin. And she went into an advanced math class, and so I was kind of hooked. Just small intervention. I was able to work with my family member, help her, and then I started working with her younger brothers. And then over the next 18 months or so, word got around the family that free tutoring was going on. And I found myself with 10, 15 cousins, family, friends all over the country. I was getting on the speakerphone, and I was writing, I had a day job this whole time, but I was writing the software. My background is software. I didn't think videos at all. I thought, that the software would be much cooler. And I was writing this for my cousins, and it was a friend that suggested, well, why don't you make some videos to help scale your actual lessons? And I immediately said, no, that's a horrible idea. YouTube is for cats playing piano. It is not for serious math. But I gave it a shot, and it soon became clear that people who are not my cousin were watching, and and it just, I was like, there's something here. We were getting letters from all over the planet, like, hey, this helped me pass my algebra class. This is what's letting me go back to school after retiring from the military. I remember those. In those. Thank you. In those early days, I remember I brought my wife over. This was like 2007. I was like, this is incredible. There was this woman, and she said her sons had a learning disability, and they were using the site to keep up with class. And because of that, her and her family were praying for me and my entire family. And you got to imagine how strange that was for me on some level. You have to remember my day job, I was an analyst at a hedge fund. I wasn't used to people praying for me, or at least in that way. And so I kept going. But, it was clearly something, but by 2009, I was kind of faced with we lived in the middle of Silicon Valley. A lot of my friends are venture capitalists or entrepreneurs, and there was this possibility of going for profit. And then there was a little just soul searching and introspection. Well, maybe this thing, and it was delusional when I was operating out of a walk-in closet, maybe this thing could be something like an institution for the world. And I read a lot of science fiction books, and I read, when I was in middle school and high school, I read the Foundation series by Isaac Asimov, and a very short synopsis is this guy predicts the fall of the galactic empire. It's going to be a 30,000-year dark ages, and he creates this foundation so that the dark ages are only 1,000 years. And I said, that's epic. Like, how come no one thinks that way? And so, these are delusional thoughts for a guy in a closet, but I said maybe Khan Academy could be like the foundation. We could help accelerate change. And it's still a little delusional, but we've gotten a little closer.
The moral of this story is the better known you are, the more relatives you find. No. the moral of the story is to always be alive to other possibilities in your life. So he really liked what he was doing. He went back to school. He was in that hedge fund. He was living in Silicon Valley. I've been out there near where he lives. It's a pretty nice deal. And then the people he started helping, and then more people read it. And it turned out what you did when you were just trying to help takes over your life. I know that can happen. And it can't happen for everybody. For most of us, we do X and we devote Y amount of time to something else. And that's a good and noble thing. But if you're just alive to the possibilities all around you, sometimes it catches fire. And it's been a great gift. It's also made you a great stand-up comedian. So let's go back to the whole Muslim Girl website. Be specific. What do you think is the main thing you are doing for Muslim women and girls? And what would you like them to do, empower them to do, that you think could change some of these knucklehead attitudes that we've got, not just in the United States, but increasingly in Europe and other places where, people treat, well, you know better than I do. And I think it's crazy the way we're behaving right now, and downright dangerous for the future of the world and for our country especially, which has been so blessed by its diversity. So what specifically do you think you can and are contributing, not only to make Muslim women more self-confident and less wigged out by this craziness that's going on now, but to empower them to actually chart a different course and maybe drag some of the rest of us along with them?
It's interesting that you bring that up because at the end of 2015, with all of the horrible rhetoric that was going on in the media at the time, even until now, it reached such a horrible point that at Muslim Girl, we felt compelled to publish a crisis safety manual for Muslim women. How to survive in the aftermath of these media frenzies, of these horrible headlines that have to do with actions that have nothing to do with us, right? I think that a lot of the domestic and foreign policies in our country fall on the shoulders of communities of color in very adverse ways. And when it comes to Muslim countries and the Muslim community, those policies disproportionately impact Muslim women and children the most. What we're doing at Muslim Girl, I believe, is creating a platform where we can empower Muslim women's voices and actually use resources available at our fingertips, like the internet and social media, to actually have a fighting chance against corporate news and corporate media, put our own voices out there, because a lot of times these policies happen to be rooted in a lot of inaccuracies about Muslim women. People that aren't Muslim, people that aren't women, think they know everything about us, right? And absolutely. So we believe that if we reclaim that narrative and put our own stories, our own voices out there, that in the long run, we could potentially impact policies and the way that they're formed. Actually yesterday was Cesar Chavez's birthday, and I noticed that there's a student building here named after him, right? Amazing. And that's really cool. By the way, I think that if the people in this room want to create change and you want to disrupt society and you want to really just do something that's going to change the world, you are literally at the best place and the best time in your entire life to do so. Right here. Right? College campuses are a hotbed of innovation, of activism. All of the greatest tides in history that have changed our nation were born on college campuses. Cesar Chavez, his legacy was of nonviolent protest, nonviolent boycott. Like at Muslim Girl, one issue that is of particular interest to us is the boycott, divest, and sanction movement. And that is a movement that is born on college campuses, and it's one that we see a lot of state and federal policies try to outlaw, right? Even though we literally revere these types of movements that have happened in our history, that have brought us to these incredible points of society. So we're hoping that if we offer a platform where these marginalized narratives that aren't finding their fighting chance in the mainstream, that are being victimized by these policies, that are being targeted and vilified, if they have an outlet, then we can uplift them, we can empower them, and we can actually change the tide of our own history right now on the course of our own lives in our own country at this time in our history, which is so pivotal and so important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cady, I want to follow up on the question I only half jokingly asked you about whether we're alone in the universe. As you know, a lot of the most exciting developments in astrophysics in the last several years have been because technology has allowed us to see outside our solar system. And we know that your numbers would be better than mine, but somewhere between 20 and 24 planets have been identified beyond our solar system that seem to be far enough away from their suns and close enough and alike enough in texture to our planet that the possibility exists that life might exist there or have once existed there. They're all many, many light years away. So I wanted to ask you a personal question wrapped in a science question. As we get more and more interested in, as you said, black holes in the universe and the possibility of a unified theory of physics, chemistry, and biology, which we're getting closer to, having discovered on the other end of physics the Higgs boson, the so-called God particle, in the last couple of years. Aren't we going to have to go out there? And are we going to have to go out there only technologically because nobody wants to spend their whole life in a spaceship? And does that mean that there will be less need for human space travel over the next 10 to 20 years? Or will there be more need for it, but within our own atmosphere and perhaps trying to save the planet from the worst ravages of climate change? What's going to happen to human space travel? And tell them what you're doing now. Because one of the things that you knew when you started, even though John Glenn went up in space at 77, there'd probably be a limit to how many times you could go in space, and you'd have to have a second act. So are we reaching the end of human space travel? Are we going to leave the Earth's solar system in space? And how's it affecting you?
So that's a lot of questions.
Just three.
Well, so I'll divide it up a little bit. When you say space travel, what's going to happen with space travel? I actually don't think of it that way at all. I mean, travel is about a mode of transportation. It's about a way of being present, which through technology we have lots of different ways of being present. But the spirit of exploration, I can't even imagine that could end. That's just like saying to people, you're going to be in your place and you're not going to imagine what's next door. And it's just that what's next door includes so much for us. When I see those pictures that the Hubble has taken, when you see that dark field and you see how many places are out there, when we have Kepler that's discovered, I think in total, 1,000 exoplanets in the past couple years. I mean, we went from knowing about 9, right? And Pluto, we'll have to talk about Pluto. But seriously, but from 9 to 1,000. I mean, so our horizon is just so much bigger, and people are going to discover that. And when we talk about when are we going to go to Mars, we are on Mars. I mean, people built those rovers, and those rovers are sending information back here. People built those space probes. I mean, technology drives exploration, but people, as humans, are always going to want to explore. But I think sometimes the smaller steps aren't as obvious, and that's part of the reason that I'm here tonight. Really, is that we're recruiting. We're absolutely going to Mars. I can look at every single one of you and tell you that is going to happen.
I have to interrupt you and say, if Trump wins, I'm definitely going to Mars. I'm actually half joking.
Go. Okay.
As I was,
Sorry.
I don't know what to say. I'm overwhelmed.
Actually, I joke around that if you can put one man on the moon, why not all of them?
Yeah.
It's along the same lines, right? But really, what I wanted to get to was the fact that we really do need everybody, and we need everybody to be ready. And it's fascinating to me to be here on the panel and listen to these stories. And, every one of us plays a part in this journey to Mars. I mean, first of all, because in terms of technology, the things that we need to develop to go to Mars, we need to recycle our water, we need to recycle our air. There's a good reason we haven't actually gone to Mars yet, and that's because we're still working on those things because they are hard, okay? But those same needs, air, water, growing plants in a place where it's hard to do that, those same needs are exactly our needs for sustainable Earth. So when you're working on space, you're working on Earth. And those solutions are going to be done by people. When we were all talking at the beginning about what we're afraid of and what's hard and the fact that we didn't, you shouldn't assume that people who do amazing things always knew it was going to work out. I think you have to realize that there's some people who wear a costume, like I'm wearing a flight suit, and it makes you think a certain thing about me, like, oh, she must be like that. And it's a little bit easier when it's a definite kind of outfit like this, right? Or Amani's, right? But what about the costumes that you don't see? What about the people, if you look right and you look left and you look at the people in front of you, you make some assumptions about who you are, and I urge you here this weekend to break out of that, really look, really ask. It takes some courage to ask people real things about who they are, and you will discover that together you are much more than you thought.
So I want to ask, we're going to answer these two questions, but so real quickly, I want to ask all of you one more, and then we'll go to the questions from the people here. So, Wael, what's your next act? What are you going to do? And what's going to happen to Egypt?
The most common question I always get as part of when I meet people here is like, what's going to happen to Egypt? And I say, normally, if you want to know what's not going to happen in Egypt, ask me, what do you think what's going to happen in Egypt? Because I was constantly wrong about trying to understand the aftermath. And I think it was not just me, joking aside, it was not just me. We are undergoing massive change that was started by the frustration of young people who were not happy with the regime that was basically aging and ruining the country's resources. And we went through like 1 year of euphoria. Everything was great. People really on the square, the 18 days, it was almost like heaven. The Muslims and the Christians, the people from different political ideologies were all together, knowing what they are against. The fact is, though, that they didn't really know what they were for. And I look back and say, like, I was shoulder to shoulder to someone. We were both chanting freedom. And probably his definition is freedom is my oppression. We just didn't know it. We just didn't really understand the complexity of change. So back to the question, right now I technically can go back to Egypt, but that doesn't, as you mentioned, I'm still there with my heart and mind. I spend most of my day looking at everything that's happening. And Egypt, by the way, is kind of crazy. Like, have you all heard the Egypt Air story? The guy that hijacked the plane because he wanted to meet his ex-wife? That's not far-fetched, by the way. that's how the situation is. And I think, joking aside, I think we had a lot of high, unrealistic hopes. And what I learned the most throughout the past few years is that change is hard. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of courage and dedication and passion. I remember that wise man I met in the streets of 25th. I went anonymously in the street. No one knows who really I was, although I was part of the organizing movement. I went at 1 p.m. All of us were super excited. This day is going to be the Revolution Day. We pre-announced it on Facebook, and 100,000 people confirmed. And then I walk into the street. Yeah, it was like that. I walk into the street, and I only see like a couple of hundreds people. And I look around and, look at my friends, and where's everybody? Like, no one is here. Like, it looks we failed again. And I remember this old wise guy, and he's like, don't worry, they will come. Egyptians are always late. So I think I did not give up hope. I think I'm really committed to seeing our country a better place. We unfortunately went into a route that will make us pay the highest price for change, but I'm still very hopeful. I think hope is the energy for achieving anything. You really need to be optimistic and hopeful and try your best. And as you said, Mr. President, you have to keep trying, because I will fail 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, but I'd rather die failing than admitting that I failed.
Yeah, we actually want to take all the T-shirts out of the gift shops that say failure is not an option. I mean, that was about how mission success was so imperative, but it doesn't mean that you're not going to fail a bunch of times in order to achieve that success.
So, Ben, you're young, you've had 2 busts and 1 boom. What's going to happen now? What are you going to do next?
What am I going to do next?
You're going to keep running it? You're going to make it bigger? You're going to do something different? What do you think?
When we first started Pinterest, we kind of built it for ourselves, and then we were excited people were using it. And when people talk about how companies start, it sounds like it starts with these grand visions, but often you just want to see something work. But then when you go farther and you see sort of what's possible next, then you want to get there. And it's kind of cruel, because there's always this widening gap. No matter how well it's going, there's this widening gap between what you think is possible and where you are. And it's that gap that's like a big motivator. And for me, I think of Pinterest as the catalog of ideas. Hundreds of millions of people, they're putting ideas in here. And then our job is to build technology to help them see the right idea for them. And it could be a small idea. It could be like what I want to make for my kid for dinner. It could be a big idea. What do I want to be when I grow up? What do I want my home to look like? But that seems like something that would be worth building. It seems like time well spent. Even if we fell short on that, just spending time to make that happen, to me, would be really exciting. And one of the things when I speak to our company that I try to keep them very focused on is there's all this muck work when you're building things. It's not romantic sounding. It sounds so many people like, oh, what's your day like? And I'm like, well, there's all this work, there's all this work you do. You're in meetings, you're making products, things aren't working. But if you can see how that work is adding up to something, and if you can remember the people that use it, that's exciting. And for me, the idea that Pinterest would become the world's catalog of ideas, and that no matter where you are, you could have a tool that lets you seamlessly navigate through all these ideas, find out which are the ones that are right for you, and that could then inspire you to live the life that you want to live, to understand what your taste is and in everything. To me, that's a really exciting idea. And so I feel like we've come pretty far, but we have a long way, and so I want to keep going as long as we can.
Salman, you long ago moved beyond lessons for your cousins. And anybody who's looked at the body of work you have produced in these short lectures, it's stunning. And yet, it must seem glacial to you now that all these marketing experts say that people have an average attention span of 6 or 8 seconds, and you have to get there. That's what I feel watching the evening news sometimes. I think I'm a fossil, a dinosaur. But what's next? How are you going to just try to distribute this, make sure more and more people have access to it? Are you going to add more and more lectures? The thing I love about what you have done is to make it possible for people really at rather dramatic levels of base knowledge in field after field after field to understand. And in spite of all the screaming and yelling and the sort of earmarks of reality TV, I still believe most human beings at the core want to understand themselves, their lives, each other, how they find meaning. And you've done about as much to help people understand, you know, the elemental building blocks of mind as anybody I can think of. So what's next? What are you going to do with this?
Yeah, you know, I was just today in the office, we were talking about kind of our 10-year vision. Where do we want to be in 10 years? And we see ourselves building out, you know, we go quite deep in math already and in some of the other science subjects. But over the next 10 years, all subjects from kindergarten through the core of college and life skills should be available on Khan Academy, and it should be available in every major language in the world, and it should be and there should be ways for students to prove what they know so they can plug into the system. And, you know, right when we were doing all this planning, we actually got a testimonial, you know, a pretty incredible one from this young woman in Afghanistan. And this was literally yesterday. And the letter, I mean, it's one of these things that just blow your mind as you read it. And she wrote how in middle school she was threatened with acid attacks for going to school. Because of that, she had to stay home. Her family, though, wanted her to get educated. She said, I just want an internet connection. She got an internet connection. They're middle class. It was a big deal for them to get it. And for the past 7 years, she's been self-educating herself. And her dream is to become a physicist and go to school in the U.S. And I mean, you know, this will make any of us appreciate our SAT experience. She wanted to take the SAT so bad, but it wasn't offered in Afghanistan. So she had to be smuggled on a 20-hour journey to Karachi in Pakistan to take the SAT just so that she had a chance of making it to a U.S. school. And, you know, the first thing, I actually Skyped with her later that day and just to ask her about her story. And the first thing she said is there a way for me to prove what I know? I want to be able to prove. And that to me says, look, you know, our mission is a free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. And we can create the resources, but we also want to create ways for students to help each other connect. And maybe most importantly, for someone like Sultana to be able to prove that she's as good as any of us in this room.
Okay. Now, we have, you know, about 6 minutes left, but we got 2 questions here. I'll read the questions, and I'll just ask any of our panelists to respond that come from the audience. We got a question from Carter that says, the 2 are related, so I'll read them both. How do you unite your community, however that's defined, to encourage them to invest and provide resources to your movements and organization? And how can we, from Eric from New York, how can we better achieve cooperation worldwide to solve the common problems that plague the developing world? It's something that's a big part of our lives now. So either one of you answer either one of those questions. Let's don't fool around with the organization. Let's just move it in a hurry here.
I can tackle the first one. I think from what I've learned personally going through the journey that I went to, it is very critical to ensure that you have you include the people. It's very easy for, I would say, like activists to alienate themselves from the masses and use a lingo that's not common between the people. I remember like Egyptians never called the regime a regime; they called them the government. And for the page we started, we called it the government. We wanted to talk the talk of the people. We wanted to connect with their language, with their daily activities. we basically wanted them to feel that we were one of them. That's one. And the second is actually inclusiveness. So one of the things that are very critical is to make sure that everybody is empowered to provide an idea. Actually, some of the best ideas that I've seen in my life of activism come from people who just come in and voluntarily give that idea up. And it feels so good and motivating for everybody else to see that your community organizing activities are very inclusive, and you listen to the people and you actually do what they ask for. And the third, I think, is to also make sure that you are dealing with realities. And this is very important. I feel this was one of the problems in Egypt, that it's very easy to build a delusional view of the world, underscoring complexities, looking at things from one angle and not looking at the overall picture. And it's very important to connect with reality, because having a vision that has to deal with reality is a vision that could get people on board with you. So I guess that's kind of like what I would love to always see in movements. I'd love to see a movement that's very clear in goals, that have a shared vision, that also make sure that everybody is included.
Anybody else?
I think I can speak to the question from Eric from New York. How can we better achieve world cooperation to solve the problems that plague the developing world? I would say that maybe we should include the developing world, right? I think that a lot of times we kind of speak in this vacuum. I think that for us as Americans, we kind of are still dealing with our own savior complex, and we have to acknowledge that there are other people in the world. They have their own cultures, their own autonomy, and it would be great if, knowing that a lot of Western countries have caused a lot of the problems plaguing the developing world, that maybe we don't know what's best for them. And maybe we should empower those countries to come up with those solutions on their own.
If I could just interject there, that basically it's what my other life is with my foundation, is we work on all these questions in developing countries, also in the U.S., but a lot of developing countries. And I try to tell all of the brilliant, totally committed, passionate, almost all very young people who work with us and know lots of stuff about how to, build healthcare systems and help smallholder farmers. I said, you have to look at these people with enormous respect. Most of them work harder than we do. Most of them are just as smart as we are, and they get by on nothing. They're heroic in their own way. So never patronize them. And every time you go to one of these countries we work in, say you're working for the day when you can come back only as a tourist. That we're not in the business of making people dependent. We're trying to empower them to live the lives that you're trying to empower Muslim women and girls, that you started trying to empower your cousins, and now you're empowering the whole world to do. That you broke barriers to do what you've done, all of you. I think this is really, really important. That's a big point you made. Anybody else want to answer any of these questions?
I just wanted to share, the view that we have from our space station, which is basically the place where we're trying out our solutions for going further. And we usually have 6 people living up there at any one time, doing all sorts of different experiments. But one of the most important things involves looking out the window and seeing a planet down there. And it sounds trite, and you've all heard it, without any borders, but it's almost impossible to feel like a citizen of one place when you see that kind of view. And so I think the ability to share that view, through social media, through technology, I think the ability to have everyone be recognized. We actually use up in space, we use this idea of, instead of reading something about how to do things, we actually use the educational video. We call them just-in-time videos, inspired by videos here on the ground, and learning to speak out. And all those things are represented up here on the panel. And I don't know, I'm looking forward to finding out what you bring.
We need to bring this to a close, but I think you guys are great. And is there one final thing you want to say to them? Anybody got anything else to say?
Sure. I never pass up an opportunity at the mic, you know?
these.
So I think that I really hope people that walk out of this room remember that we should never shy away from our personal stories, stories of adversity, stories from our own marginalization, our own communities. We need to find the courage to put those stories forward, because at the end of the day, those stories are what make us human. Those stories are what allow us to empathize with each other, to connect with each other, and it's only through that that we can really change the world.
Anybody else?
Can I say that it all starts with an application? In communication, all of the 1,200 students that are here, you filled out applications and you communicated who you were and what you wanted to do. And everything starts with filling out a piece of paper. And we've talked about how people like us who've achieved some, things that in our path, it's not that it just kind of happened and we just had to wait for it to happen. You have to actually find a way to communicate who you are on a piece of paper or through electronics to the people who have what you need, which is resources or the ability to tell your story. And so it starts with having the courage to express your ideas and realizing that what you think is an interesting thing to do is probably a really, really fascinating and absolutely necessary thing to do. So make sure you learn how to share.
And if you don't hear back on that application, go knock on that door.
I like it.
If no one comes to answer the door, that's how we do it.
So,
Well, I'll throw out a story that happened to me about 20 years ago. I was with my roommate. We had just watched Chariots of Fire, and
great movie.
Great movie, and I was
Great movie.
and I was inspired after watching that. It was like 3 a.m, and I was like, man, I want to go for a run, but it's 3 a.m. And my roommate, who's like this track star, he's like, don't waste inspiration. I was like, really? He's like, don't waste inspiration. And he just kept saying it, and then I just started running. And I ran for like an hour in the middle of the night through like Belmont, California. But ever since then, I whenever I'm in kind of one of those moments where I feel something, I just hear Ravi saying, don't waste inspiration. So I'll just leave that with all of y'all.
Parting word?
Yeah, so in the night of 28th of January, 2 days after the major starting protest took place in Egypt 2011, I was walking in the streets of a small neighborhood in Cairo, 1 a.m., so it was dark. And I was tweeting, I heard that the government is going to shut down the internet next day morning. There were just rumors. So I wanted to tweet something to tell the world that we are in trouble, and we're going to be in trouble. So I wrote, like, pray for Egypt. The government is planning a massacre tomorrow. They're shutting down the internet. And it was such a coincidence. A few seconds later, someone hit me on the head. I fell down on the floor, lost my balance, fell down on the floor, find 3 armed guys surrounding me, taking away my computer, my phone. Yeah, I had those until 1 a.m. And basically covered my face and wrapped my head so I can't see anything. I was blindfolded, and took me to a place where I don't know, where I stayed there for 11 days, not knowing when I'm going to go out, what is happening with me, did my family know, and what the hell is happening in the streets. I have to say, like, I remember someone asked me as soon as I came out, and I was completely like a different person. He was like, were you scared? It's like, what the hell this guy is thinking? Yes, I was totally scared. I did not really know what was going to happen to me, and I actually started having suicide thinkings. And the only thing that kept me going was the thinking that the feeling of regret was met with my feeling that it doesn't really matter if you lived 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever. I mean, here you guys go to 100. It's great. I'm not complaining. It doesn't really matter how many years you live. It's actually what matters is if you, during those years, have stood up for the principles and the values you actually believed in, even if your life is a price of that. So.
I guess the only thing that I would share is that, I mentioned I blew up all these companies before, and when I think back on whether they were good ideas or bad ideas, I don't really know. I think that you never know which parts are good timing and good fortune. All you can do is do the best with the opportunity that's handed to you. But one thing I know for sure is one of the big differences that it made for me at Pinterest was that I found people that could help me that had skills. And whenever you hear stories, for storytelling reasons, it's best that you have like one actor in there. And all press tells you that, but pretty much everything great was built by a lot of people working together. And I would just say that you're at a really special time. You're at a time when you can build relationships with people that they've studied things that are different from you, they're from different backgrounds, and I guess I wouldn't take that lightly. I think it's actually the relationships you build with people, that's the greatest asset. And I would remember that whatever you see and whoever's speaking on behalf of something great that was done, they're actually speaking on behalf of a great team. And so if you have the opportunity to build those relationships, I would invest in those really heavily.
Well, we have to quit. So let's basically to take the distilled lessons there. The new government was installed this week in Myanmar, Burma, the first non-military government in forever. And it's an interesting dilemma for women. It happened because Aung San Suu Kyi fought for decades, in and out of the country, at risk of her life. Then she wasn't able to leave her country when her husband was dying in England. Then she won the election, and then the military people said, oh, but the Constitution says she can't be president, not because she's a woman, and not because she keeps beating our brains out in these elections, but because she's got relatives who aren't citizens of Burma or Myanmar. At 70, having worked all these years to create these possibilities for really fascinating people, good people, in an amazing society, she says, I don't have to be president for freedom to win. She gives the opportunity to somebody else. She gets 3 or 4 ministries. It's obvious she's going to be running the government in every profound way. And we have opened new doors of possibility for people who could not have imagined them even a few years ago. Aung San Suu Kyi has this amazing ability to look into the eyes of the people who have stood in not just her personal way, but in the way of her country's progress, and see them as people. She understands their fears. She understands their convictions. And she has a way of both rising above it and dealing with it. Nelson Mandela was the best I ever knew at that. So you should remember that. This guy, talk about a raw deal in life, and yet he never met a soul he did not see as a person, as a human being, as a potential ally, as someone to be treated with respect, won over if possible, opposed if necessary, but never in hatred. That's about all I've learned in all these years. Try to see everybody. Try to understand people who are different from you. Don't quit dreaming. Maybe you'll succeed on the 3rd time. Maybe you'll succeed the 1st time and then it'll go haywire and you'll have to wait a long time for it to come back. That's Myanmar. Maybe she'll be out there in space one day and find out we're not alone. And maybe she'll look back at planet Earth and say, we were never alone. We just needed to stop acting like it. And maybe one day every kid in every poor village in the world will have enough power and access to technology that they can all be Khan Academy students. And one day, finally, the Muslim world will be able to be treated the way everybody would like to be treated, as individuals, without prejudice, with a commitment to equal opportunities for men and women, and reaching across the divide to what unites us. Maybe all this. If so, it will largely depend on you. Thank you and good night. We'll see you tomorrow.